Listeners, I see Michael already smiling. He anticipates what I will say. My good friend.
And I put my head on a block and I offer Mr. Brother Bishop the scalpel to cut it off.
The political leader has said several times up to last night that is not a reflection of her personal views or the views of the party. And you understand, George, how elections at the party level work.
So, Dr. Pei, do you have ties? Do you have ties to the National Democratic Congress, Dr. Pei? Or rather, were you commissioned by the NDC
to use that information? Because it seems interesting that a lot of your advice is very consistent with what was said. Brilliant.
And good luck with everything.
You too, man. May the best candidate win in the town of St. George.
But kill on.
Yes.
You is a tongue man too, so stop at that. Tell everybody you are a tongue man too.
We seek the truth.
Would you be handing your resignation to the Minister of Culture tomorrow, sir?
No, I will not.
The leader of the opposition, you have accused your government, sir, of using the Grenada Development Bank to facilitate the financing of personal loans for certain government ministers.
The other side is in no position to talk about those issues, and I will leave it there.
We discover new perspectives.
You know his leadership style, and so many are saying, why are you coming now to talk about those issues?
Now is the time to speak. You have the right to decide who will take over.
And you met with Dr. Mitchell, and perhaps you might want to confirm what that meeting was about in your response. But
Dr. Mitchell, like myself, are Grenadians.
We ask the right questions.
Why was there no report on the work done of the commission? And how is this new committee different from the commission that was initially established back in 2022? So who are these elements that are using you?
I'm disappointed in my political leader.
And why is that animating those political conversations now?
It's a very interesting question.
The Bubb Reports with Dr. Kellon Bubb. Thought-provoking, truthful, unbiased, and truly original reporting.
Tell us, a commissioner of police, tell a politician, back off. You have no knowledge of the law. You have no knowledge of law enforcement. You cannot force my officers to do the wrong thing.
But that is somebody's son. That is somebody's child. That is part of a family. And I think that is the part that they are missing out.
Because E and F are apt to be used oppressively.
It's like because we don't see disabled people as sexual beings, which is ridiculous.
You mean they don't want to listen to your version of science? They have their own science. You have your science.
What we need to do is teach people to think and not what to think.
Today, it's too bad that everybody do what they want.
If I could forgive Bernard Ford, then I could forgive Bob Morris too. And today, on this day, I no more have anything in my heart for what he did.
The education system has to be very fluid and dynamic because we're living in very different and changing times.
Treating all your citizens equally, all your citizens fairly, recognizing each group, not discriminating against one or the other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. We are happy that you can join us for yet another installment of the program. Now, education has played a transformative role in Caribbean society as it has lifted recent generations out of poverty by opening up a broader range of career opportunities, thus improving their standard of living and overall life prospects. However, although countries still emphasize the importance of education, the World Bank recently released a scathing assessment of the Caribbean's education system, which is characterized as being in crisis. Now, at the heart of its findings were outdated teaching methods, inadequate infrastructure, and unequal access as factors hindering student success. Now, the report says that many students leave primary school without mastering basic skills of literacy and numeracy, which hampers their ability to succeed in secondary education and beyond. The implications of this crisis are far-reaching, according to the report. Now, without a strong foundation in basic skills, students are therefore unable to acquire higher-order competencies required for more complex critical thinking, problem-solving, and creativity, skills that are essential in today's knowledge-based society. Of course, this has also a direct impact on economic growth and development, as poorly educated workforce is less productive, less innovative, and less able to compete in a globalized world. Now, without a doubt, the current and emerging situation is worrying for employers, as they have been expressing concern about how ill-prepared high school and university graduates are for the workplace. Now, in the Caribbean tech space, the situation is especially acute, as new and more sophisticated technologies are being used in our local markets, but skilled personnel in those technologies and the attendant services are few to non-existent. So what can be done about this crisis? Now, Bevan Joseph, a Caribbean social capital guru, says the following as a call to action. 1, for policymakers to implement reforms and embed digital learning, financial literacy, and career readiness into national curricula. 2, for business leaders to partner with schools and training programs to offer internships, apprenticeships, and digital workforce opportunities. 3, for educators to advocate for updated teaching methods and training that integrate digital learning into the classroom. And 4, for investors and funders to support programs that provide access to digital tools, online learning, and workforce training for Caribbean youth. Of course, the education system being in crisis is something that the Caribbean needs to take very seriously. And as we go to break, folks, and get back to the first segment, I was also happy this weekend to see the play Hamlet last Friday. The plays includes Grenada's very own Rachel Onika Phillips. Her masterful performance of Hamlet's A Room in the Castle at the Folger Shakespeare Theatre was indeed a treat. And Rachel continues to wow audiences as the first Grenadian to ever perform in Broadway and to play major roles in Broadway productions. I also had the pleasure of connecting with Jenny Woodruff, of course, who I call Auntie Jenny. Auntie Jenny, my good auntie from many, many years ago, who was also in attendance. So if you are in the Washington, D.C. area, if you are in the DMV like me, between now and the end of April, that play is happening there at the Shakespeare Theatre in D.C. So make sure you see it and support the arts. And I will be posting the show's link in our chat. Folks, this is the Bubb Report. Do us a favor by liking this week's live stream, and we'll be back for the very first segment of the program. Please stand by. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching. And folks, welcome back for the first segment of our program, the first segment of the Bubb Report. Of course, we are supposed to be joined by former Senate of the President, Chester Humphrey, but unfortunately, we are still trying to reach him. We have not been able to do so as yet, but our producer will keep trying. Now, for the first segment of our program, we will be making sense of the Speaker's handling of the conclusion of debate on Grenada's 2025 budget in the lower house of parliament last week. Now, having returned from their lunch, Finance Minister Dennis Cornwall stood up to close the debate. Now, at the time he was speaking, both Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell and members of the opposition were absent from the chamber. It must be noted that at the commencement of Cornwall's contribution, Dr. Mitchell was the lone member of the lower house who did not contribute to debate on the budget. Now, during Cornwall's presentation, the speaker then proceeded to call him to his bench and subsequently brought the parliament to recess. His explanation was that if he allowed the member for St. Patrick East to continue speaking, then that would have precluded both members from St. David and St. George Northwest, respectively, from contributing to debate on the budget. Now, upon resumption of the recess, the Prime Minister entered the chamber and proceeded, following the Speaker's announcement of his inability to reach Dr. Mitchell, to assert his prerogative to close the debate instead of the Member of Parliament for St. Patrick East, who initially stood up to close the debate. It was then that an interaction ensued in Parliament following the return of the members of the opposition who objected to the Prime Minister closing the debate, following the Speaker's ruling on the issue. And of course, the opposition's objection here had to do with Standing Order 40, which speaks to opening and closing motions on debates in the House. And of course, here to make sense of this, of course, is former Senator herself, former Senator Dr. Tessa Sincere, who has been on the Bubb Report before. But I want to preface this by making the point that Dr. Sincere is here in her personal capacity, and she's not representing the political party with whom she is now associated. She's here as someone who sat, of course, on what is called the Standing Orders Committee of the Parliament, of the previous Parliament, that is before 2022. Of course, Dr. Sincere sat with former Senator Chester Humphrey on that committee. And so the reason why she was brought here is because she has familiarity with the standing orders of the House. And I understand, Dr. Sincere, that you also prepared many youth parliamentarians in the work of the House. So let's start there about your experience with the standing orders of the House as the premise for this conversation.
Good morning, Kellen. Good morning to all listeners and viewers. Happy Sunday to everybody. It's always a pleasure to be on the Bubb Report and to engage in these sorts of conversations. Yes. I am really happy that you decided to delve into this, and particularly to make mention of, my experience training the youth parliamentarians, the national youth parliamentarians, for debate. Now, it's kind of important for us, and I want to use this as an opportunity for education as well, for learning.
And that's what we try to do. It's all about, for us, it's about education as well. Yes. So
beautiful.
Proceed.
And yes. I think, Kelon, all of us need to have, I actually have a copy of this. This is the standing orders of the House of Representatives. I also have a copy of the standing orders of the Senate, having been a senator, as you said. And I think, everyone should know what these documents say, because sometimes we see the comments coming out, and sometimes these comments come out of a place of not knowing what the standing order says. And it's interesting that, standing order number 40 came out in the budget debate. But I want to preface my comments on what transpired, paying particular attention to the fact that the Speaker of the House is in charge of the House. So there are standing orders, yes. He will not breach the standing orders, but there are opportunities where the Speaker of the House will make a determination based on what prevails in the House at a particular time, so as to observe fairness and transparency and all of that for all members on either side of the chamber. So I want to say that, right? And I know we're hearing, oh, the speaker might be biased, and the speaker is this, and the speaker is the other. I also want to say that if we go back into history, we will notice that all of the speakers that were before had some sort of alignment to a political party. And I wish to point out here the former speaker. Do we remember who was the former speaker? Right?
That was are you referring to Mr. Pear? He was
right, and Mr.
Speaker,
Pear,
yes.
Mr. Michael Pear, right? And before that, I believe it was Lawrence Joseph.
Yes.
Yes. And if we search through the annals of history, we'll see that these speakers technically do have alignment with certain political parties. So to say that the Speaker of the House is being biased to one side and not the other, from where I sit, I do not see that. I see the Speaker, and now in direct reference to what happened, was being transparent, was trying to give every member of the House an opportunity to speak. He took the recess, and based on his explanation when he came back into the House, yes, he explained that he reached out to both members of the House who had not spoken as yet. The Prime Minister came into the chambers. The member for St. George Northwest did not come into the chambers at that time, right? He allowed the Prime Minister to take the floor and to make his presentation. So I am a bit challenged here at the call for the Speaker being biased and so on, when in fact he took a recess, clearly went out, had a conversation with both representatives, and came back into the House and explained what had happened and proceeded.
Well,
so Kellon,
yes, but I think, and we do have your former Senate President here, Mr. Chester Humphrey, who will be joining the conversation shortly. But of course, I think the point needs to be made that this is, again, the conclusion that the Speaker is biased is not based only on this particular sitting of the House. In fact, former Senate President Chester Humphrey has observed, and again, he has sit in the chair of adjudication, that the Speaker, over time, during his current tenure, has not been playing the role of a neutral umpire. And in as much as you come from a particular political background, once you are sitting in that chair, it becomes a role where you are a neutral arbiter, respecting both sides and taking on the roles and the contentions of both sides of the House.
I agree with you, Kellon. I agree, but I can only speak to what I have observed. Yes. And I have not attended all of the parliamentary sittings. Mm-hmm. I was present for the closure, the last session of the budget debate. I was present. I can only speak to what I have experienced and what I have observed. Maybe former president of the Senate, Chester Humphrey, might have been following all of the sittings. I cannot say that I have been following all of the sittings, so I can only speak from my place.
From your personal experience.
All right.
And yes, please, I didn't mean to cut your train of thought, but I do intend to bring in Senator Humphrey, former Senator Humphrey, your colleague there, in a second. But is there anything else you wanted to add on that opening gambit there? In respect of the role of the Speaker.
I anticipate the entry of...
There you go. Well, Senator, good morning. Former Senator Humphrey, good morning, sir. Welcome to the Bubb Report, sir. Again. Your audio is a bit low there. Are you able to remove the headphones? Because we can't seem to hear you. We're getting a lot of background noise. So we're going to put you backstage for a bit there, because we can't seem to hear you very, very well. I'll have my producer reach out to you, sir. But Senator, let us now continue. Let us talk about the role of Standing Order 40, specifically here, in how debates are conducted in the House about who is supposed to close motions, who is supposed to open motions, the role of government business in all of this?
Right. So
the lead of government business, that is.
The lead of government business.
Yes.
So again, I believe Standing Order 40 was read in the House, and it is clear, Kellon, that this is a budget debate, right? So we expect, and according to the standing orders, the Minister for Finance, in presenting the said estimates in his budget, may speak for as long as he wishes. This is the first. So the Minister for Finance would usually, yes, present the budget. So the Minister for Finance spoke, and all other members will speak, right? The Prime Minister gets as much time as the Minister for Finance, or 2 hours, whichever is longer. And again, this is based on the standing orders, right? This is Standing Order 40. I'm still reading from that. All other members will get 1 hour. I think that the area for contention as presented in the House was subsection 5. And that section reads that the minister finally concluding the debate, whether the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, or any other minister designated by the Prime Minister may speak for 1.5 hours in addition to his earlier speech on the budget if he had already so spoken. And I think this is where the contention is.
Yes, right. So this is so let us talk about this, because when the finance minister, the member of parliament for St. Patrick East, stood up and he started debate on the motion, the impression that, again, as someone who covered parliament, because of course he opened debate on the budget, is that he would be closing debates on the budget. What should have been the speaker's role in that very moment?
So again, Kellon, I think based on my knowledge of what happens in the parliament, there would be a speaking order.
Yes.
Right? Both sides are aware of the speaking order. So if the speaker realizes that, there is a move away from the speaking order, let's call it that, it is within his right to call the member on the floor to the bench to find out what is going on. Right? And I believe that was done. The member returned, and apparently there must have been some miscommunication or something. The speaker then called the member again and had a recess to ensure that the procedures that were previously agreed on is upheld. And again, this is me sitting in the parliament looking at it, right? I was not privy to all of the information that either the speaker or Minister Cornwall or the member for St. George Northwest had. I'm just looking at what happened in the parliament while I was sitting there. And again, the speaker taking a recess, asking for a recess, is well within his rights.
Right. So the recess occurred. The recess occurred. Following the recess, Parliament resumed. It was at that moment that the member for St. David entered the chamber. Yes. However, members of the opposition were still not in the chamber. Yes. And then it was at that point that the member for St. David, now tell us what occurred there, because the member for St. David stood up and was about to make his contribution to the debate. Obviously, he did not make his contribution yet. So should the speaker have given him the opportunity again to then, after making his contribution, to also close the debate, as opposed to allowing the members for St. Patrick East, that is, to continue his contribution?
So again, Kellon, the standing order allows the Prime Minister to close the debate.
To close the debate, okay.
The standing order allows the Prime Minister to close the debate. And this is what the Speaker explained when he came back into the House. So the Speaker, based on the prevailing circumstances, made as you would say, a judgment, right? that both persons had not spoken. He had a speaking order. He went out, took a recess, had a conversation apparently with both of the members, came back in, explained what had happened. Then the member for St. David said, well, he is willing to, wait for the member for St. George.
For St. George Northwest, because of course, Dr. Mitchell did not contribute to the debate. I was curious about that. Well, first of all, why was he not there? Why was he not there to contribute, or to represent his constituency in that moment? That was a curiosity to me as well. But please
I
proceed.
have that curiosity as well, and
Yes.
I'm taking it from being the facilitator for the National Youth Parliament. I had youth parliamentarians in the House, and one turned around and quizzically looked at me and said, well, what is going on? This is not what's supposed to be, because I actually teach the youth parliamentarians from the real standing orders before we get into the standing orders for the youth parliament, so they are aware of what is supposed to happen, right? So the member for St. David came in, and the speaker said to the House, here is what happened. I took the recess, went out, did this, came back in. The member for St. David is here. The member for St. George is not here. We are going to allow the member for St. David to make his contribution. At which point, sometime during the presentation, the member for St. George came in, right? Again, it is the speaker's determination, judgment as to how to proceed. I remember clearly that the member for St. David indicated that he was willing to give way so that the member for St. George could make his contribution. So I am saying all of this outside of knowing what the conversation was outside of the chambers when the speaker took the recess.
Let's see if we can bring back former Senator Chester Humphrey. Mr. Humphrey, can you hear us clearly, sir? Now.
Yeah, I can hear you. I didn't know what the challenge is on your side.
Yeah, your sound is very low for some reason. I'm not too sure what's happening.
Well, this is volume.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yes. Let's see what we can do here. We'll keep working with you, sir, because we do have to get your contribution, which is valuable. But we also have to make the point, former Senator, that the Prime Minister was also out of the chamber for most of the debate. So I think in fairness to both sides, we also have to make that point. Yes, Dr. Mitchell was out, but it was only after, I suppose, the Speaker went to seek them out. But here, there ought to be a responsibility for members to be in the House at all times, yes?
I love that you raised that. I love that you raised that comment, Kellon, because this is the people's business. But yes, members, I remember myself being absent. And the procedure for being absent from the chamber is that you would inform the speaker. So again, remember I started this, that the speaker is in charge of the chambers. Whether we like his political affiliation, whether we like him as a person, whatever our belief or thoughts about the speaker is of no importance when it comes to the office of the Speaker of the House. He is in charge of the House. So if as a member you're going to be absent from the House, and this is based on my training, you indeed have to say to the Speaker that you will be out of the House, whether it's out for the entire session, whether it's out for a period. You do need to say to the Speaker that you're going to be out. So I am assuming that both members might have indicated, I do not know, I'm assuming that both members would have indicated to the Speaker that they would be out for a period. If they are indeed in the chambers and have to leave, the standing order does allow for a member to move from the chamber, holding the decorum, exit the chamber, and come back into the chamber whenever he or she is finished with whatever that person needs to deal with.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if that
and we also have a curious question. Someone is saying, no, this is not the question. Tessa Barry, another Tessa, no relation, yes? Dr. Tessa Barry as well, is saying, I was confused when Minister Cornwall continued speaking after approaching the speaker. What was said that allowed Minister Cornwall to continue?
Well,
obviously you don't know. We don't know. But as a curiosity, he went to the speaker and then he continued speaking.
Right.
What if you were an adjudicator in that moment? Would you have allowed Minister Cornwall to continue speaking, or would you have called for an indefinite recess at the speaker's discretion if you were in his position, given the context in which the speaker said, well, the member for St. George Northwest is not there, the member for St. David is not there, he was not in Parliament, we have to be fair. A lot of them were not there. What would you have done in that situation? Would you have adjourned for the day?
Well, Kalon, you're putting me in a very compromising situation here.
Well,
because clearly I'm not the speaker. So the speaker would again, I'm saying that based on the prevailing circumstances, the speaker would make a determination. I cannot speak to what the speaker was thinking. I cannot speak to what, Minister Cornwall had said, what the conversation was.
Yes.
But clearly there must have been some sort of miscommunication, right? Because the Minister Cornwall went back and then the speaker called him again. And then the recess was taken. So that part of it, I think it appears as if there was some miscommunication, to which the speaker responded by taking a recess to clarify what was happening. And again, that was well within his role. Sometimes we look at these matters and we look at them through colored lenses instead of looking at them objectively. It is a very difficult situation to, I'm using difficult loosely, to manage that kind of robust discussion that is happening in the House.
Right.
And so to appear to be fair to everybody, sometimes the speaker will consult with the clerk, and sometimes the speaker will take a recess, or sometimes the speaker will adjourn the sitting, and then things are put into proper perspective again and return to the chambers.
So none of this would have happened if members were in fact present in the chamber. Yes? Would you agree that this might not have happened if members were present in the chamber?
Potentially.
Folks, member for St. David, member for St. George Northwest, members of the opposition, please be present. Again, I'm not the speaker, I'm just saying, yes.
We cannot make a blanket statement because we do not know if either member, St. George Northwest or St. David, had indicated, because you would also know,
because you did mention that they have to give excuses as well.
Right. And during the debate, I had actually seen notes being passed to the speaker. So I cannot say that they did not indicate that, they would be out of the chamber for a period of time or not. So yes, I would agree with you, considering or bearing in mind that they may have indeed given a notice that either of them might have been out of the chamber.
Let's get to another comment. I'm not excusing the behavior of the opposition. I don't agree with the walkout. However, I've watched both the upper and lower house, and Ms. Decima Williams seems to have a greater grasp of the Senate upper house through knowledge and chairmanship than what we see in the lower house, House of Representatives. As a citizen, I'm fed up with the Movelang in the lower house. There is always also again, in the Westminster tradition of parliamentary democracy, that the upper house always appears to be this quote-unquote rarefied space. Speak to why that is. Is that a holdover of what happens in the British House of Commons that we have inherited, that in the lower house you always have, again, common quote-unquote behavior as opposed to the upper house? Speak to that, please, because, again, the quality of debate in my observation over time, having covered Parliament for many years in Grenada, has been much more collegial and in a way scholarly in a way.
Right. And I agree with you. I think it goes back to, as you say, maybe the Westminster system, but it also goes back to our Caribbean politics. And when we get into the House, sometimes, you know, the robustness of the discussion, the debate takes on, you know, a different light. Let's put it that way. In the Senate, we are appointed and we are expected to behave in a particular way based on that appointment, right? So even from my experience in the Senate, I remember Chess having to pull me up once, and I smiled. I looked at the note and I smiled, and I said to myself, well, okay, but I cannot, while I don't agree, I will not, I ought not to make this an opportunity for debate. And this is what we're seeing happening, right? And again, I'm speaking to this objectively. We stand on points of order. We stand on points of clarity. I heard the leader of the opposition stand on a point of principle. And then the speaker had to say, well, based on the standing orders, there is nothing called a point of principle. And then she said clarity. And then he said, well, you can't be standing on a point of clarity for this. It has to be a point
of order. Yes, and the speaker also made that point. But
no, I'm just saying that in this situation, the speaker was very lenient. In another chamber across the Caribbean, that speaker might have said to the leader of the opposition, please resume your seat, because clearly we have to know what you're standing on, and there is no principle. You cannot stand on a point of principle or a point of clarity. It's a point of order. So I think the speaker was very lenient in trying to be fair to everybody and all of that. But that's my take.
Yeah.
I remember since Chess is hearing me now, I remember Chess pulling me up on the length of my jacket. Yes. and I smiled, and I did not, as I said, there is no way or no matter where a member in the House should be engaged in this kind of back and forth with the speaker, and Chess knows that to be true. You do not use a point of order as an opportunity for debate. You state your point of order and you resume your seat. And cardinal sin number one for me in the parliament is having an argument with the speaker. The speaker is in charge of the House.
The speaker, ultimately, irrespective of what we think about the umpire, he is the umpire. Yes, Mr. Humphrey, good morning, sir. I hope you can hear us better now when we can hear you.
Yes, good morning to
yes, all's well that ends well. Yes.
Yes. Sorry, I don't know why we have this problem each time I'm coming on your program. There's always some issue. Because I switch computers to get around the problem that we had in the last occasion. I know you're saying that you're not hearing me.
Well, now we can hear you loud and clear.
Well, because I'm using my phone.
Yes, and that's fine. I'll definitely have my producer make a visit to you. We may have to do a site visit to look at your technology. But again, Mr. Humphrey, welcome to the conversation. Again, we were speaking here of both the conduct of the speaker and the responsibility of the members to be present in Parliament. And we came to one of the conclusions that perhaps if members were present, that maybe that might not have occurred. Of course, Dr. Sensei is also making the point that maybe members might have issued excuses for not being there as well. So I want you, in a nutshell, Mr. Humphrey, as former Senate President, if you were in the Speaker's chamber at the close of the debate, what would your approach be in treating with what occurred in Parliament, what we saw occur in Parliament at the end of the debate?
First of all, the fundamental problem from my observation of what is occurring in the House
I think we lost you there.
Is the lack of knowledge of the rules.
Yes.
Now, an umpire, like an examiner, and Dr. Sincere will be familiar with this because she is in academia. You can't examine the students if you yourself don't know your subject matter. And that's the crux of the problem here. Because firstly, and I'll deal with the behavioral aspects because that's a separate issue but entwined in it. And I've made my views on both component parts of the problem known. And I will repeat. Firstly, if the speaker had knowledge, and the speaker must have knowledge of the absence, first and foremost, of the Prime Minister during the debate on the budget, that the Prime Minister will be absent from the chamber. He must have knowledge of that. It is his responsibility to inform the House, because no matter whether it's the Minister of Finance presenting the budget, essentially, this is the budget of the Prime Minister because he's head of cabinet. The buck stops with him. It is his budget. And if he's going to be absent from the House, and one could expect this to happen to a Prime Minister because he has many duties to perform, and some of these duties may be emergency matters that arises during the process of a debate, the Speaker has to make that announcement. The Speaker has to say, honorable members, I wish to inform that the Prime Minister will either be temporarily absent from the House, or the Prime Minister will depart and come back to the House because he's attending to other matters of state. So that the whole House is aware. I mean, it had become so embarrassing that even the Minister of Finance was not aware as to what was happening. Because the Minister of Finance, as is the normal course of things when you move a motion, the mover of the motion presents the motion, outlines the broad ambits of the motion, its objectives, its reasons, etc., etc. And he presents that motion, and then he sits and the debate ensues. When everyone has spoken, the mover of the motion, in this case it was the Minister of Finance, gets up and winds up the debate. But because the Speaker failed to inform the House of the absence, when the Minister of Finance got up, as is normal in other motions, there was a brief intermission with the Speaker calling the Minister of Finance to the table. And thereafter, some adjournment took place. I can't recall all of the sequences. But the fact is, it was very obvious to the nation that the Minister of Finance was not aware of his surroundings. And that's a fact. Else he would not have commenced. Now, under Rule 40, the Prime Minister does have the power under Rule 40. But let me go back to Rule number 5, Rule number 5, because the Speaker is seriously wanted.
Senator Tessa, Rule 5. Sorry, I always call
Rule 5. The Speaker is seriously wanted. Rule 5, subsection 5. The Speaker shall be responsible for the management and general administration of the House. And this is what I'm saying. The Speaker must have known, or the Speaker should have known, that the Prime Minister will be absent from the chamber from time to time. And the Speaker should be in a position to know why the Leader of the Opposition was absent from the chamber. No. And again, it all boils down to the fundamentals of respect. If a member is going to exit the chamber, the member does so, and if he's going to exit for an extended time, he sends the presiding officer a note. Right? But as I said to you, the the Minister of Finance was embarrassed because he was not aware, and I'm certain that the Speaker was aware, because when the question will arise, I don't know, I don't have the hardcore evidential facts, but circumstantial common sense tells me when the Minister of Finance got up to wind up the debate, because he was the mover of the motion, and that is the normal process that happens. He has the final say. It is clear he was not aware that the Prime Minister was coming back in the chamber. And even more importantly, it would appear that he was not aware that the Prime Minister was going to wind up the debate. Now, if the Speaker had that information, the Speaker should have made that information known to the House. Now, when the Prime Minister got in and Rule 40 was invoked, and Dr. Mitchell got back in the chamber, I do not know whether or not the Speaker had knowledge of the absence of Dr. Mitchell from the chamber, but again, the whole question of respect, the whole question of just common manners that we learn at home, we practice it in the schools. When you're going to be late for school, you bring an excuse, right? And Senator Sinclair knows that's how we operated in the Senate, right? If you're going to be late, you call the clerk and say, Mr. Clerk, could you please convey to the Speaker that I'll be late? So the Speaker has knowledge. If you're going to leave early, you send the Speaker a note, you bow to the chair, and then you leave gracefully. That is what is required in the House. That is the quorum of the House. Bowing to the chair doesn't mean you're bowing to the Speaker personally. You are bowing to the authority that the chair carries and the symbolisms of the chair. It is totally out of order to challenge the Speaker in the way in which Dr. Mitchell challenged him. And I say this without fear or favor. It's unbecoming. And that's not the way it should be done. But again, the Speaker, look, presiding in the House is both an art and a science. The science is the knowledge part of the rules. The art is how you come across as an individual. If you come across as a rambunctious individual and your body language is hostile, and your body language is, look, when I talk, no dog bark. And I will give you examples of what I talk about. Dr. Sincere will tell you, Senator Sincere will tell you that in the Senate, during the debate, every member speaking has an additional 15 minutes at the discretion of the presiding officer. But because I appreciate the importance, the most important event on the calendar of events of the Parliament is the presentation of the debate on the budget. The presentation of revenue and expenditure, moved first by a motion and then followed up into law, is one of the most important activities. And because I recognize that, and because I recognize that the Parliament is a house of the people, and it is from the House that the people get to understand what their business and how their business is being treated and taken care of, I begin every session of that debate by simply pointing out that every member has, in the case of the House, the 15 minutes.
Yes.
It is automatic because of the importance as a presiding officer, my internalization of the importance of the exercise to the nation. Because the budget affects every aspect of life of the citizen. They may be involved in taxes, it may be involved in removal of taxes, it may be involved in the introduction of new processes, it may involve expenditure in different areas as it has to be. And therefore, but in this Speaker, you have 10 minutes more. And the Speaker, I think, if I'm not mistaken, told the Prime Minister is 7 minutes. Really? Really? The Speaker is exercising the discretion as a big bad bully in order to prove himself that I am the man.
Well, yes,
Rather
Mr.
than
Humphrey,
taking an approach,
Mr.
and I'm
Humphrey,
saying, and this is
yes,
this is
quickly
why I've
wrap
said.
up that point, stick a pin, because we have to get to Tessa here. Tessa, I do want you to respond again.
So
Earlier before,
let me come back to 40
Mr.
because there's an
Humphrey,
important thing in
yes,
40 that I
Mr.
think the
Humphrey,
senator
yes.
is missing here.
Hold on,
Sorry.
Mr. Humphrey, hold
Okay.
on. Let's get Dr. Tessa to respond here. Again, in the earlier part of the conversation, Tessa, we were speaking to, again, just the role of the speaker and questions about his role as an umpire here. You've heard what your former Senate president said here about this particular conduct, and then we will get back to what he wants to articulate about an addition to Section 40. But is there anything else you wish to piggyback on or rebut?
Not really. I cannot make a judgment. I cannot make an evaluation as former president has made, because I would just look at the standing orders and what should happen. So to say that, the speaker is behaving in that rambunctious and meaning to, stamp his authority and so on, I will not get into that kind of conversation, but I will definitely speak to what is in the standing orders here. And yes, the speaker is in control, is in charge, and former president is correct when he highlights standing order number 5, was it?
Yes, standing order 5, yes.
Presiding in the House, but we must all, you see, it is kind of difficult to take one standing order and deal with it outside of the other standing orders. So the standing orders must be looked at as an entity together, because one applies in a situation, but there are other things that need to be applied in that particular situation as well. For example, I draw attention to standing order, rules of order 43 and 44, responsibility for order in the House and what constitutes order in the House. Because that subsection 1 of 44 says the speaker or the chairman in committee, after having called the attention of the House or the committee to the conduct of a member who persists in irrelevance or tedious repetition, yes, either of his own arguments or of the arguments used by other members in debate, may direct him to discontinue his speech and resume his seat. The speaker attempted to do this a number of times, and it goes back to the respect that the former president of the Senate is speaking to, the respect not of the person, but of the position of that chair, that office that the speaker holds.
Yes, Mr. Humphrey, go ahead, please, sir.
If I may, I agree with Senator Sincere in that the rules are all integrated. None completely stand on their own, because there's a body of rules that regulates what happens. But I have to beg to disagree with you that your last reference don't really apply in this situation here, because it was not a case of repetitious argument at all. It was a case of, from what the opposition side was saying, something that they had not experienced before, and it's pretty unusual. But then again, we have to go back to the rules. And Rules 40 is what the Prime Minister used in order to assert his right to speak last. And he has such a right to come back again to the Speaker. Because you see, the administration of rules is not simply a nuts and bolts matter. As I said to you before, it's both the science and the art, the way in which one conducts his deportment, right? So if you come into, I described it earlier in the following way. The speaker sees himself as a lion tamer, and he sees Dr. Mitchell as the lion, and he has a duty to tame him. And the lion thinks, of course, he's the king of the jungle. So as the king of the jungle, he has entitlements beyond everybody else. Now, when Prime Minister Mitchell, the member for St. David, invoked the power under 40, right? I want to submit that the invocation of such a power should have been announced to the House before. When the mover of the motion moved the motion, he should have said, I wish to inform the House that under Standing Order 40, the Honorable Deacon Mitchell should wind up the debate. So there will be no clear expectation, as I'm saying. And also, I'm coming back to this point again, and it all comes back into the lap of the Speaker. Now, I don't expect Senator Sincere will exercise the liberty that I'm exercising, because she may have other disciplinary infrastructure that she has to comply with. I have no such restriction.
I disagree with
I
you.
have no such restriction. So I'm speaking straight. And this is what I'm saying.
And she disagrees, but go ahead. Yes.
But the Speaker must have known that that the Prime Minister will be away from the House from time to time. But no announcement of that was made. So the Speaker was failing in his duties.
We're not contending that. We're not contending
Right,
that.
right.
I'm saying is that when he came back, he did give an
Senator, an intervention. Yeah, go ahead.
No, but the question arises. The following question arises under 40. And because the Speaker doesn't know the rules, he's unable to guide himself and the House. Because although 40 gives the Prime Minister the right to rebut, the question would arise is this. Given the fact that the process of rebuttal had already started before the House became aware of the intentions of the Prime Minister to rebut, is that process reversible to allow the powers under 40 to take place? And there is what the law calls it a lacuna. But Rule 40 doesn't answer that question at all. But it's a very important question. Remember, everything is on process. The process of the rebuttal had started when twice, I'm told, the Minister of Finance got up to wind up the debate. Right? The question therefore arises under 40. Can the Prime Minister exercise the powers under 40? Will the process have been started? And I think that's what created the confusion. Now, when Dr. Mitchell came, again, he wasn't rules-based, right? I thought that when the leader of the opposition, the Honorable Eminent Place, stood up, because I was following on television, I thought she had a sense of something because she began to speak. And I thought she was going to raise the question of whether or not the process having started, whether or not the Prime Minister powers under 40 could still be applied. Now, because that issue is silent, what the Speaker had to then do was to, as we say in an integrated way, is just simply say, Dr. Mitchell, I would advise you to read rule number 5 of the standing orders. And rule number 5 of the standing orders makes it clear. Subsection 6 of 5 says, and I read, and I quote, the decision in all cases for which these standing orders do not provide shall lie within the discretion of the Speaker and shall not be open to challenge. Now, if Dr. Mitchell was aware of that rule, and the Speaker was aware of that rule, we could avoid this fracas that took place. Because all the Speaker simply had to say, I exercise my power in respect of 40 to allow the Prime Minister to proceed to wind up the debate, because the 40 is silent on whether or not the process of rebuttal is reversible. Because the standing orders doesn't speak to that at all. And I would submit, I would submit that it will be quite a challenge. But the Speaker has the authority to make a ruling. And not to make the ruling under 40. He can't make that ruling under 40. He has to make that ruling under 5. But the Speaker is not aware of the rules. So having been told by the member for St. David, who's a lawyer, well, look, I coming back and speak, and I could do it under 40. He just parroting. Could I read 40? Could I read 40? But 40 doesn't answer the question. What answers the question is 5. Because under 40, a question arises.
Yes, on a point of order.
You want to rise on a point of order?
President, on a point of order. Can I rise on a point of order, please? An intervention for former Senator Tessa here, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Bubb. Because what Senator Humphrey is saying is exactly, I was sitting there. He may not have said it in those exact words. When the recess finished, the speaker came back in and he made a pronouncement to the entire house. He did. I was sitting in the chamber. So whether he was aware that 40 should not have been used or 6 should have been used, the fact is 6 gives him that authority to allow the member for St. David to speak without challenge, And understanding orders also give an opportunity for appeal. If you decide or you think that the way in which the speaker adjudicated the matter was not satisfactory, there is a procedure in here for dealing with that. So we go back to 6.
Agreed.
So we go back to 6. Without challenge, the speaker stood up, made a determination, and said, okay, I am going to, and I hear all that, what you are saying, Senator Humphrey. I'm hearing everything that you're saying. And perhaps this is an opportunity for the standing orders, the current standing orders committee, to take a look at this and to do some improvements. Because as it is now, I don't think except for that change that we made when I was in the Senate under your leadership, Senator Humphrey, where we introduced the use of electronic devices in the House. I don't think any of these standing orders have been changed, modified for quite a while. So perhaps this is an opportunity for the standing orders to be reviewed. And
right, agreed.
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Humphrey. Yes.
Agreed. And may I conjoin your appeal by saying it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. I mean, the Prime Minister, a member of St. David, was on his feet explaining some important developmental issues to the nation. Right? And he was just kind of had to cut off. I mean, how do you know, Senator doesn't say that in the House of Representatives, on any ordinary bill brought before the House, you are limited to 15 minutes? Could you imagine that? You know, in my chamber, there's no such limit. I will deal with you under the rule of repetition. But I can't understand it. I can't understand how the House limits representatives to speak on bills, laws which are going to be introduced to govern your life. And all you're allowed is 15 minutes? So there must be a thorough overhaul. I agree with you. I'm conjoining with you on this one. A thorough re-examination. And I'm not looking for work. But if people believe that I can make a contribution, I am available to do so without fear or favor. When it comes to the conduct of the business of Parliament, I don't have political sides. I said before that the conduct of Dr. Mitchell in the House is despicable. And who wants to be upset with that? That's their business. But this is a display that the nation sees. And I've made the point that the time has come. The time has come, because not all the rules that need to be changed, But the speaker must make himself conversant with the rules. You cannot be an umpire in a game. You cannot be a judge. You cannot be an examiner if you don't know the subject matter. And that is it. That is the fundamental problem that this parliament faces.
Yes, Mr. Humphrey, stick a pin. Tessa, go ahead, please.
I cannot join with you on that because in this particular space,
I wasn't asking you to.
Let her finish, please, Mr. Humphrey. Let her finish.
In this particular space, we are actually speaking about that Standing Order 40 and what happened at the budget debate. Before you came in, I had explained to Kellon, well, I do not look at all of the sittings, so I cannot say that the speaker does not know. I cannot make a determination of whether he's knowledgeable or ignorant of the standing orders. What I can speak to is Standing Order 40 and those that are linked to it in this particular circumstance. And based on my observation of having sat there looking at what happened, I saw firsthand what happened. And Senator Humphrey, you would agree with me that and I'm not, this is an objective observation. The members of the opposition walked in, walked out, walked in, walked out of the House. So if we are there to discuss the budget, as you say, it's a very important, that's what I started this conversation with Kellon with, the importance of the estimates of revenue and expenditure, right? We ought to take this as a serious discussion, a serious debate. We ought to take the parliament as a place where serious business happens. And you're correct. When I was in the Senate under your leadership, Senator Humphrey, we could not have gotten away with those things. We could not. But I cannot speak to the speaker's knowledge or of all of the standing orders and so on. I can speak to what happened at the budget, the closing of the budget debate. He came in after the recess, he made a pronouncement, and he went ahead to let the member for St. David speak. And if we are going to invoke, whether the correct standing order was invoked or mentioned or not, the speaker does have the power on the standing order number 6 to allow the member for St. David to speak, to make any determination without challenge. And if a member wants to challenge a decision, the standing orders provide for doing so in a respectable manner. And that is my contention. The House must have order. A member ought to be
decorum. A certain level of decorum in the House is required. Otherwise, we will degenerate into what you see there. And you know, we have to, as leaders, be responsible. I saw a video making the round in which a police officer was forced to arrest a young lady. And he had more than probable cause. And this is because people have come to believe that the way to behave is any way you feel. And that is so sad when we as leaders who should be setting the vision, and the world now has become very visual. In the old days, you couldn't see things. Now the world is a visual place. Everything is seen. And so how we conduct ourselves, right, is important. And again, I must add, and finally on this thing, it's important as to how the presiding officer conducts himself. Because you remember, you need to draw respect. You need to get people to respect you. And therefore, to get them to respect you, you must carry yourself in such a manner. And you must avoid unnecessary antagonism. I have never ordered a member to sit down. I've just said, I've just said to the member, could you please spend a moment and read Standing Order A, B, C, D, E, F, G? I have never thumped my chest. I am the speaker. When I speak, no dog bark. Sit down. You know, when you send these signals by your body language, by your tonal quality, there are multiplicitous ways of communication. There's eye communication, the way in which the tone of your voice, right? The way in which your body, as people said, they can read your body language. All of these things are important when you are charged with the responsibility of doing certain things. Now, if you see the way judges operate, anytime a judge makes a decision, he grounds it someplace in the rule that you can refer to. And I'm saying if the speaker was knowledgeable of the rules, he would have discovered that the question which had to be answered under 40 was whether or not the process of rebuttal having begun, could it have been suspended? And I'm saying the rule is silent on that. And because the rule is silent on that, the speaker is entitled to make a decision, but then he has to refer to 6. So the speaker now has to point to the House, the entire House, why he's ruling the way he's ruling. I am invoking my powers under 6. And let me read 6 for you, right? But as I said, I don't know.
We can continue to have this conversation ad nauseum. We really have to get to the next segment. I have esteemed, some might call them comrades, waiting in the wind. 2 comrades who served in the Grenada Revolution, and of course there was also a Trump supporter who was supposed to join us, but unfortunately on the last minute he declined to appear on the program. But the segment will continue.
Or what? He's ashamed of his ideological complexities.
That is a question that you might have to ask him, so I can put you in touch.
Many years ago, I learned something. I'm young, gifted, and black. Proud to be black.
Yes.
So if he's a Trumpite, he should be proud to be a Trump man.
Yes.
I must say he has taken the wind out of my sail, because I was looking forward so much.
I know you were looking
to this
forward
discussion.
to joining that debate. Yes. But Dr. Tessa, over to you, madam, for some closing comments. And thank you again for appearing on the Bubb Report this week.
You're most welcome, Kellon. Thanks for having me. I am going to again call, for regular citizens. This is our business, and we need to know what these standing orders say, whether we're in Parliament or outside of Parliament, because the Parliament regulates our business. So it is in our best interest to know what is said in there, and for us to be able to contribute to those kinds of discussions. Because sometimes, as a regular citizen sitting outside looking at what is going on, as Senator Humphrey said, the world has become very visual, and without a clear understanding of the standing orders. A couple of people did reach out to me and ask me, what is this? What is happening? Should this happen? And so on. We need to know the standing orders. I will say, Kellon, as I always say to the National Youth Parliamentarians, do not take what you're saying in our real parliament as what should necessarily happen. And that is why I actually do my facilitation from the standing orders and not necessarily from what we see happening. So again, this is a call, for regular citizens to be aware of what the standing orders say, and also for us to be able to contribute to meaningful discussion on those standing orders. I'm also maybe putting out a call that these standing orders be reviewed, because some of them, things like, dress and so on, that has changed.
Well, yes, so you bring up dress code again, and I'm glad you brought that up, because you said former Senate President Chester Humphrey pulled you up on dress code. Could we speak on that? Because that was an issue that came up in relation to one of the members in Parliament for this budget debate.
I don't think Senator Humphrey remembers, but he received a note, and I saw the receipt of the note, and then he sent me a note, and he said to me, Senator, I am reminding you that the dress code for the Parliament is business attire, which means that your jacket sleeve should be down to your wrist, and mine was a little above. So I was surprised by
so you took that tutelage into consideration.
Yes, I do believe that, because sometimes we're moving away from the colonial, and there are some things that remain. We have removed the wig and so on. Why not review in our review of the standing orders, review dress code
Dress code as well.
as part of that. Just putting that out there. But I was chastised by Senator Humphrey. Senator Humphrey, I wasn't pleased, but I did not argue with you.
as the presiding officer.
Well, my job is not to please you. I'm the presiding officer. My job is to maintain order and to preserve preserve the decorum of the house. And the decorum of the house is very British, right? Until that changes. Just one word of caution. We have a penchant for throwing out bath water, soap, and the whole baby. So we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful. We reach a stage now where even you tell somebody good morning, they rebuke you as being old-timeish. All right. I grew up when you answer a business phone, right? You first announce the place. So if I'm answering the phone and I'm an employee at the Ministry of Labor, I say, "Good morning, Ministry of Labor. Chester Humphrey here. How can I help you?" Not as has happened to me in one of the ministries, not the Ministry of Labor. I call, "Yes, yeah, yeah," and then she say, "Okay, sweetheart." No, come on. Not from a business point. All I'm saying is we've got to be careful when we're doing these changes that we don't throw everything out, right? Otherwise,
don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right, we have the tendency to go towards anarchy. We can see it in the way in which we dress. As I was telling my son growing up in my days of courtship, how neat you had to be to attract a girl. You had to have your hair well groomed. You know what I mean? You had to have your white handkerchief just barely out the side of your back pocket. Your shirt, your pants have to be well ironed and so on. Today, what I see, right? Today, what I see, if that's the standard, boy, we in deep trouble.
Yes. Senator Humphrey, I would indulge you to stay around because we have to get to the next segment. But viewers and listeners, this has been a very important conversation. And I take that call, Dr. Tessa, in relation to having public education on the standing orders. And perhaps we need to have another segment with you and Mr. Humphrey, where we can have, again, not only reacting to what occurs in Parliament, in the context of the everyday machinations of Parliament, but having regular public education updates on the importance of the standing order, the role of the standing order in the context of a parliamentary democracy. And I hope to get a commitment from both of you to let me finish, please, Mr. Humphrey. I hope to get a commitment from the both of you that is something that you would be willing to do in the future. Yes? Is that a yes?
Senator Humphreys. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
No, I just wanted to make one final point. And that is not, and that is, I have been consistently calling over the years for the return of civics in the schools. And I am only now beginning to understand why the political will has never been exercised and returned that subject in the schools. And it's simply because it's not in the interest of politicians for people to understand the processes. It's in the interest of politicians to keep people ignorant. So our constitution, which governs, is the fundamental of all laws. Our parliament, which is a very important institution in the governance of the state. The average citizen know absolutely nothing about them. And as an educator, I would want you to put that in part of your list of demands in the changes that you seek to make in the education system. That the citizens be taught from birth about the importance, the role of parliament, how it functions, why there's a parliament, how people are expected to behave, what are the rules.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because when you get to elderly people, they are consumed with how they paying their taxes, how they sending the children to school, how they meeting the groceries in the shop. They had no time to come and sit down and listen to this thing, this dry business called Parliament and so on, right?
Yeah.
So you have to put that information in from young, very young.
Yeah. Very well, folks. On that note, thank you so much, Tessa Sincere and former Senate President Chester Humphrey. Again, Senate President, he was not the Speaker of the House, as some commenter says. Viewers and listeners, please stand by as we get to the second segment of the program.
That if we cannot reach a sensible agreement on this matter, then if the cost of it is the loss of my visa to the US, then so be it. But what matters to us is principles. This matter with the Cubans and the nurses should tell us everything that we need to know. Barbados does not currently have Cuban medical staff or Cuban nurses, but I will be the first to go to the line and to tell you that we could not get through the pandemic without the Cuban nurses and the Cuban doctors. I will also be the first to tell you that we paid them the same thing that we pay Bajans, and that the notion, as was peddled not just by this government in the US, but the previous government, that we were involved in human trafficking by engaging with the Cuban nurses was fully repudiated and rejected by us. Now, I don't believe that we have to shout across the seas, but I am prepared, like others in this region.
Cuba continues to be a trustworthy friend and partner, not only of Grenada, not only of the Caribbean, but of peoples the world over. When the COVID pandemic broke out, Cuban doctors went as far as Italy to provide services. I didn't hear anybody talk about human trafficking or nothing like that. Were it not for the selfless support of Cuba, many of us would not have had the opportunities for further education that we got. Health infrastructure would collapse without the generous intervention of Cuba. And for that, we must always take a principled stand.
Hi everyone, thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching. And folks, thanks for staying with us for this week's edition of the Bubb Report. Of course, if you are joining us, we right now have just close to 600 viewers on YouTube. That's a lot of people on YouTube. Please remember to just hit the like button on YouTube so that the algorithm can cause us to reach this program to a wider audience. And of course, we have close to 200 people on Facebook as well. Just hit that like button and share this week's edition of the Bubb Report. Now, for the second segment of this week's edition, we will be making sense of the current administration in Washington's bid to intensify sanctions against Cuba. Now, in February, the administration announced that it will expand a visa restriction policy to target Cuban officials believed to be tied to a labor program that sends Cuban workers overseas, particularly healthcare workers. Now, Cuba's health service generates a major export earning by sending doctors and nurses and other health workers across the world. Now, part of this new policy will also target Caribbean leaders and officials in Caribbean countries with visa restrictions who benefit from the Cuban medical mission as well. At least some Caribbean leaders have come forward in defense of the program. Dr. Raul Gonzalez of St. Vincent and the Grenadines said they would gladly forego their U.S. visas. Now, here to make sense of this issue, former Grenada's former ambassador to Havana, Her Excellency Clarice Charles. She was also the Member of Parliament for St. John, but she served as Grenada's envoy to Cuba for many years, as well as the Honorable Peter David, Member of Parliament for the town of St. George. He was also Grenada's Minister of Foreign Affairs for a long time. And of course, Mr. Humphrey is staying with us for this segment as well. Of course, he comes from that revolutionary tradition. Of course, incidentally, this week we're also celebrating or commemorating March 13th, 1979 in Grenadian history. Now, as a programming note, Dr. Fuad Khan, who was the health minister for the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago under the previous United National Congress administration, he initially indicated that he would be appearing on the Bubb Report this week to appear on this segment, because he has called for the doctors and nurses to be sent back to Cuba, and he has called for the Caribbean, well, for Trinidad and Tobago at least, to comply with what the United States dictates are in the context of this position. But of course, Dr. Khan, who also makes no bones about his support for the current Trump administration in Washington, D.C., he decided to not appear on the program. But of course, in that case, I will play devil's advocate for this segment. And I would open with a general question here. And the general question to all of you panelists here, and this has been Dr. Khan's position as well, is that this particular Cuban medical mission program is exploitative. And of course, Dr. Khan points to data that speaks to the compensation that these medical professionals from Cuba receive. And in fact, a lot of that compensation goes back to Cuba instead of in the pockets of the medical professionals from Cuba who are sent to these countries to work. So, ladies first, I want to begin with you, former Ambassador Clarice Charles, on this question. Is the program exploitative? And does Washington have a legitimate point here in saying that essentially, if you're not going to be compensating these Cuban medical professionals in a way that is fair to them, as opposed to sending the money back to Cuba, then that makes it, in many respects, labor exploitation? Ms. Charles.
Well, good morning to everyone. Good morning to the listeners, and good morning to you, Dr. Bubb. First of all, I would like to ask a question as well. How does that arrangement with Cuba and Grenada or any other country, how is it the business of Dr. Khan, and how is it the business of Donald Trump and Marco Rubio? And in what context are you claiming that it is human trafficking? Do you know the meaning of human trafficking? It is enshrined in the UN Charter as to what is human trafficking. And the other issue I would like to ask is, if I am to propose to send back every nurse, every doctor because of what the US says, what do we do in Grenada? Who cares about us? Maybe Dr. Khan can take his visa, take his money, his US, and go to the United States and go to Mount Sinai Hospital or Florida Baptist or something like that. But the majority of Grenadians cannot afford that luxury. So it is very well and good to say, send them back. But it is not a simplistic question, is not as simplistic as this. And of course, we are a sovereign country, and we are supposed to determine our own destiny and what we do. But I think it is very, very disrespectful for anyone to say to us that Cuba is trafficking these people and we are benefiting, so we should send them back. I don't know if we know the process by which these doctors come. I will deal with Grenada. Grenada requests a certain amount of doctors and specialists. That's what we do. We say we want gynecologists, whatever. Cuba would choose. They would ask. The Cuban doctors would say yes or no. And then when I was there, they would come to the Grenada embassy and I would interview all of them. And it's separate interviews, and they were all interested in coming to Grenada to help, because the Cuban system is not a system for profit. It is a social good that they do, because they know that health is not for profit, unlike the United States, which is capitalist, and if you don't have money, you don't get the best health care. Therefore, I interview them, they agree, they come. Remember also that American doctors have a very big loan, student loan, that they have to pay. The Cuban government, everything is free. These doctors do not pay for the training. They come to Grenada, and the Grenadian government supplies the rent and everything, and they give them a certain amount of money. I do not know the exact amount, but I can tell you it is sufficient for them to live in Grenada and save. Then a certain percentage goes to the Cuban government, of course, as a repayment for services rendered. They got everything free. Now, the Cubans can go back to Cuba anytime they wish. I have known, for example, when I was in Cuba, there was a doctor who said to me he was going to Ethiopia. In 6 weeks, he was back. He said to me he did not like it there, it was too hot, and he returned. So they are not slaves. In human trafficking, you are a slave. You can make any decision on your own. That is not the issue.
Well, okay. Let me bring in Mr. Peter David here. Mr. Peter David, again, and I would quote. I would quote from an article from the Havana Times. I believe that is a sort of a dissident diaspora article, and this is an article that was written in March this year. Of course, in the context of everything that is that Washington has been articulating. And I will go ahead and share that article as well, because in those conversations, I believe in getting all sides of the issue. And this is what the article says here. And Mr. David, I want you to pick up on this. He said, again, the title is Cuba's Medical Missions, a Modern Form of Slavery? Question. Cuban doctors go with state security agents. They must hand over their diplomas, and their families remain in Cuba, hostages of the state. He said, and this is Hector Chamis. He said, I attended a hearing of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. It was requested by Prisoners Defenders International, an NGO based in Madrid, whose mission is to make visible and denounce human rights violations, mainly in Cuba. Precisely, the session was titled Cuba, Human Rights of People Participating in Medical Missions, unquote. And then it goes on to say here, in other words, exploitation, a salary that amounts to a fraction of the value produced by the task and well below the average salary from the same task in the destination country. The simple arithmetic of this gigantic business is unequivocal. Of the total program, only 10 to 15% is allocated to pay the professionals. The remaining 85% goes to the Cuban government, which by this means collects between $8 to $10 billion each year. And again, we have to caveat this, the Caribbean is not the only place with this program. They're worldwide, including in so-called first world Europe, right? It is the leading item in Cuban state current accounts, surpassing tourism. Mr. David, this is the context in which I want you to respond to this issue here. What say you?
Thank you, Kellan. Am I being heard?
Yes, you are. Loud and clear.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here again. You know, the utter hypocrisy with which this issue with Cuba is being dealt with is amazing. Let's put it in its context. The context of this recent issue is an attempt by the U.S. since 1960 to blockade Cuba and stifle that country to death so that the revolution is reversed. And Marco Rubio's attempts now falls squarely into that. It's not as if, you know, there's normal relations with Cuba. Cuba is developing according to its own path, and then this issue comes up. This issue must be seen in the context of an attempt by the United States to reverse the Cuban Revolution. Now, Cuba has a right as far as the United Nations is concerned, as far as Grenada is concerned, as far as all signatories to these international agreements. Cuba has a right to develop on its own path, except that the United States has refused to accept that. Imagine, Cuba cannot trade with its closest neighbor, the United States. And in fact, more than that, with the Helms-Burton legislation in the United States, Cuba doing business with any other countries, they have tried to stifle that over the last 60 more, since 1960. So let us put it in context that this issue, and I do not trust any of the articles that we are hearing about. I've been to Cuba, Ambassador. I've dealt with the Cuban doctors. I have known Cuban doctors to come to Grenada. Some of them remain in Grenada. Some of them travel on to other countries. Most of them go back to Cuba. Whether or not this article, I have not read the article, I have not dealt with the details, but certainly we can have that discussion. But what I do know is that we are a sovereign country. You know, the United States has a right. For example, President Trump recently set up tariffs against Canada, against Mexico, because fentanyl is coming over the Canadian border and coming over the Mexican border. So he's decided to put on sanctions. Well, you know, that's the U.S. right. We have a right to have relations, not just we in Grenada, throughout the Caribbean. Healthcare for us in this country is the biggest issue. You recently heard our budget debate in the parliament, the issue of healthcare. Did we not have this relationship with the Republic of Cuba, our healthcare system would be much more in tatters. And what has the United States come forward? Rather than the United States come forward and say, listen, Grenada, here's what we will do. We will help you build a new hospital. We will help you set up clinics throughout the country. We will help you with free training in our country, in the United States, with healthcare. We want you to stop getting assistance, stop getting medical professionals, stop getting doctors trained in Cuba because we don't like Cuba. We are a sovereign country, and I am proud of our Caribbean leaders who have stood up to this issue. I'm proud of our Grenadian government, the Vincentian government, all of the governments in the region. Remember, Cuba is not only important to Grenada, there's a long history of relations, our international airport. What has Cuba done with Grenada? It has helped us become more developed. Cuba has done nothing to stifle our development. Our international airport, training of engineers, training of agronomists. In COVID, Cuba came to our assistance during Ivan. So the point I'm making is, there have been these articles, this what I call vulgar propaganda against the Cuban government is nothing new. Cuba has a right to its development. Cuba has not exported to us and said, Grenada, you must have this form of government, you must have this political system. They've said, listen, we are helping you. In fact, in the US, when there was Katrina, if you remember, Kellen, I'm sure you remember that, Katrina, Cuba sent help. Venezuela sent help to the United States for impoverished communities. So this issue of exploitation of workers, it is a smokescreen used by the Americans and Marco Rubio to stifle the development of Cuba and to use us as proxies in that war. And I'm proud of our Caribbean leaders. This is one issue in the Caribbean that I expect there will be universal condemnation of these attempts.
Well, let me bring back Mr. Humphrey here. Again, Mr. David, you really did not speak to, again, and you may say that the article is a smokescreen, but this is from, I suppose, somebody who's a Cuban doctor. Mr. Humphrey, any thoughts on that?
That makes it credible, doesn't it?
Well, Mr. David, again, I have to play the devil's advocate here because Dr. Khan is not here. So
I would have loved to have Dr. Khan here because you're not doing a good job of being a devil. You're not a devil.
Mr. Humphrey, again, and you might be singing from the same hymn sheet, though I know that you are not one to subscribe or believe in certain types of hymns here, but you might be singing from the same hymn sheet as your two revolutionary comrades here. Should the people of Cuba not have the rights to their own self-determination? That is what the United States, the argument that the United States is making here.
I'm utterly disappointed this morning
Yes.
because the main course on the menu, Dr. Khan, I'm told by the chef is no longer available. And I would have loved to ask Dr. Khan a simple question.
Yes.
Where is his clinic in Grenada? Is it located in Grand Anse? Is it in the town of Goa? Where does Dr. Khan have a clinic? Once he was able to answer that question, I will then point to him dozens of Cuban doctors. My family doctor is a Cuban trained individual. He's been living in Grenada now. He came here as part of the government to government exchange and practiced here for many years. He went back to Cuba, he came back here, he remained here. And most Grenadians will tell you, is one of the best family practitioners. He's an internist, and he sees thousands of Grenadians. Yes, I know Cuban doctors personally. So quite apart from having them a relationship as doctor and patient, I know them personally. On my property, I have Cubans who live here as part of the residences here. And so we are exceedingly close. And I know not of a slave who wants to come back on a plantation to work and make inquiries of how can I get back to do another term. I'm prepared and I would wish to work. And I know Cubans purchase quite a lot of things here that is available in Grenada and not in Cuba because of the blockade. And I mean, Dr. Khan has to be totally confused or to have read his history upside down. But I don't know where slaves went to purchase anything. Yeah. So let's be clear. I think that the Honorable Peter David has said it, and the ambassador to Cuba, my good friend, Clarice Trade Union buddy, and everything have said it because she has lived there for several years. She has traveled throughout Cuba. She has traveled in all of the different Cuban communities. And so she can speak firsthand, and not like Dr. Khan, who I'm assuming is reading some Havana Times printed in Miami, all right, with all sorts of stories. The fact of the matter is simply this. The vast majority of practitioners of medicine, loads of them, including my daughter, studied medicine in Cuba. All right. The world knows about first of all, they started the propaganda that Cuba doctors weren't doctors, they were nurses. When that propaganda never took root because people were able to see in the Miracle Eye program, in which I think there was something like about 25 or 35,000 people from CARICOM traveled to Cuba. In those days, Chavez was alive. So the Venezuelans provided the air transport. And the Cubans used their medical facilities. Because if it's one of the things that the Cuban government don't sacrifice, it's very hard for them to sacrifice, is the whole issue of medicine. When I hear my daughter talk about how medicine is practiced in Cuba, the standards and the things that they do, and the medical procedures, and so on, it's well, in fact, the United Nations says it. Cuba has more doctors practicing outside of Cuba than the entire United Nations. So I would like to ask Marco Rubio that if I had a spinal injury, or as I have now, I have a sciatica problem, which American doctor based in Grenada can I go to see and get that attended to without charge? And if Marco Rubio could point to me of where such an individual or individuals are located, then there's an opportunity for us to possibly have some discussion. But until now, and until then, this anti-Cuba thing, attacking Cuban medical workers and calling them slaves, is both erroneous, it's laughable, and they will find few allies. I think Dr. Khan must be the only one to have adopted
his
that
political
position.
leader, that's Kamala Persad-Bissess of the UNC as well.
Well, there you have it. But for the vast majority of Caribbean citizens, and for the vast majority of citizens throughout the third world, in Africa, in Latin America, wherever you go, right? Whether it be in Brazil, whether it be wherever. I mean, the Cuban quality of medical practice is exceptional. I mean, look at a small country. They have made significant major scientific breakthroughs. Remember, they have developed their own vaccines for COVID. They have developed their own polio vaccines. They have developed, in fact, the Cuban system for treating diabetes is such that in Cuba, the incidences of amputations as a result of diabetic difficulties are the lowest in the world, including lower than that even of the United States. Well, that's an amazing thing for slaves to be able to do. In other words, all of the incidences that you could refer to in the practice and standard of medicine, that small country Cuba, with a population of just about 12 million people, totally blockaded by the United States. Blockaded by the United States. As a matter of fact, if I travel to the United States and I pulled out some US dollars and spent it there, I've committed a criminal offense according to US law. Because for me to spend US dollars there, I have to have permission from the US Treasury. That's the ridiculousness of this blockade that the United States has imposed on our people, whose only crime is to choose an alternative path of development.
Yes,
that's the only crime.
And Mr. Humphreys, stick a pin. I want to respond to Ms. Grace Rapier and others who are saying that this panel needs someone from the other side and this panel is not balanced. Again, we did reach out to Dr. Fuad Khan, who has an opposing position to this issue, to everything that members of this panel are saying. I did present the other side. Again, what we try to do on the Bubb Report is to bring all sides of an issue. We invited Dr. Khan. He confirmed that he was going to be on the program, only to pull out at the last minute this morning. So it's not a matter of that, we did not make a good faith attempt. We always make good faith attempts to get all sides. But Ms. Charles, I want to bring you in here on the question of, and Mr. David as well, who served as foreign minister. We have seen, and Ms. Charles, of course, you served as the Grenada's ambassador to Cuba during the first Trump administration as well. So I want you to speak to the impact of the embargo on Cuba in what you've seen firsthand in the context of Cuba. And based on in Trump's second term, of course, his rhetoric has gotten much more intense. Of course, he's just released a list of travel bans that includes countries in the Eastern Caribbean. I believe St. Lucia is on that list as well. So what can the Caribbean, the rest of the Caribbean, expect given what you've experienced in Cuba? In other words, what I'm saying is, based on what folks have experienced in Cuba, would we be seeing the same thing if the United States decide to adopt sort of a more Monroe Doctrine approach to sanctions and things like that in the rest of the region? Ms. Charles.
Okay, one of the things we have to look at is why Cuba is being punished. And Cuba is being punished because it has chosen an alternative political system. What we call Western democracy is another political system. It's as if you choose to drink milk, dairy milk from a cow to get your calcium, and another person choose almond milk to get the calcium. two different political systems. And I think that in the Caribbean, when we say we want a different view, do we want a view that just opposes for opposing's sake without any facts? Most of them have never been to Cuba. Is that what we want? So somebody says that Cuba is an island and we want an opposing view that says Cuba is a continent. Is that what we want? I want to also address the issue of Cuba government holding the families of the doctors hostages. I can say with all truth that this is absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue. As a matter of fact, some of those doctors remained in Grenada, and after a time, they sent for the families. If the families were being held hostage, they could not send for the families. The embargo has its good and its bad, and of course we can look at the bad. Because the bad means that Cuba has not been afforded access to a lot of medicines, and the statistics are there where thousands, hundreds of children have died because of lack of access to medication. Is the United States correct in punishing children because Cuba has decided to have an alternative political system? And let us look at what we call alternative political system. In Grenada, we vote every 5 years for a government. We vote for the government and we vote for against the government. We get an opposition, we get a government. And that is the end of our democracy. Nobody asks us a question, nobody involves us. Nothing matters. We go to consultations on the budget, nothing that we say is normally embedded in the budget, or very little. I want anybody to prove me wrong that they went to any consultation over the years, NNP, NDC, ABC, and anything they said was implemented. The Cuban system of government is from the street to the village, right up to the government. Before the budget, there are consultations on every street, and every street gets together, a certain amount of people living in an area, and these people choose their representative. That is how it happens. So for example, if you are living in Frecuente, you get together, you choose your representative. The person in Montu, choose your representative. And so you end up getting a council for the south of St. George, not because Mr. Andy Williams choose anybody, but the people choose their own representatives. We have to decide if the Western system of democracy has done us any good in the Western world. All it has done is to create an opposition that makes confusion, prevents development, and tribalism. That is what it does in most cases. The bad is that Cuba has suffered from a lot of deficiencies, as we know. However, the good is that they have become self-reliant in medicine, in food, in architecture, in agronomy, veterinary, every living thing. They have learned to lean on themselves. And I think if you enter Cuba, you will find that in every area there are self-contained, what they call polyclinics, that contain every living thing. It is a country of primary health care dealing on preventative measures rather than treatment. That is what the Cuban system is about. It is a system that educates people about their own health. It is a system that follows up and knows everyone. It is a system without fear or favor, where everyone, regardless of their financial advantage, can get free medical attention. As a matter of fact, Cubans were leaving Miami and coming back to Cuba for free medical attention. And it is a fact. It is a fact. It is the WHO, the World Health Organization, that has said that Cuba has the best health system, the best educational system in the Western Hemisphere. Not me. So if you do not agree to the policy of governance, then you can say, I do not agree. I prefer the American system. But let us also look at it another way. This idea with Trump and Rubio is not simply a matter of taking away visas from politicians and only taking visas away from the population. It is not as simplistic as that. It will have a lot of ramifications for us in the Caribbean. And the question, we are just collateral damage. The question is, what next for us in the Caribbean?
And that is the question. What is next for us? Of course, let me bring in Mr. David, because Mr. David, I'm not too sure if you served as foreign minister during the first Trump administration, because I also remember it might have been former Minister Oliver Joseph as well. But I do remember that in the first Trump term, he summoned some Caribbean leaders to Mar-a-Lago to have discussions, I believe, in bilateral discussions in relation to Haiti and other matters of Western
Venezuela
as well. Venezuela was a big issue at the time. But at that time, Mr. David, CARICOM did not, it was not a CARICOM meeting per se, meaning CARICOM representatives was not there. It was only a hodgepodge of leaders who attended. So the question is, what advice would you give to those who currently are holding the reins of office around the region? How should the region approach a treat with a second Trump term that seems to be much more aggressive in its backyard, shall we say?
Well, listen, first of all, we have to recognize the reality of where we are and the realities of our fragile economy. So we have to maintain good relations with the United States, as we have maintained over the years. We have to ensure, because we have thousands of people in the Caribbean, maybe hundreds of thousands of Caribbean people living in the United States. We have to recognize that. And we have to recognize that we need to maintain good relations. But we cannot maintain good relations at the expense of our dignity and our sovereignty. The fact is that the United States has relationships with China, a system that they do not share. They have relationships with Saudi Arabia. The United States has had relationships with countries who do not share their political system or ideology over the years, and good relationships for that matter. In fact, one will recall, if you're old enough, that the United States maintained under the Reagan administration and other administrations good relationship with apartheid South Africa in an engagement at the time we call constructive engagement, which said we have to work with them despite the fact that it was an apartheid, most oppressive country to African peoples at the time. So the United States has done that. So why the focus on Cuba, a small country, no threat to the United States? And it's very political, Kellen. You know that Cuba is about Miami. Cuba is about the United States elections. It's about the Cubans living and other Latin Americans living in Florida, and Florida being an important seat. So we are being caught, as Clarice indicated, in the crosshairs. We are collateral damage, but we must maintain our dignity. Despite the political orientation of the Caribbean islands, left, right, center, we must maintain the right to pursue the development of our countries independent of foreign intervention. Cuba has never said to Grenada, we must change our system or we must cut relations with this country or that country. China has never said to Grenada, we must cut relations with the United States or this country or that country. Our diplomatic relations has always been based on non-interference in each other's internal affairs and our right to pursue our path to development. And that is the issue. So, for example, We need to engage with the United States. The issue of guns. Guns are pouring into the region. I mean, as I said earlier, President Trump imposed sanctions on Mexico and Canada because of what he called the flows of fentanyl and other drugs across the border into the U.S. We have to engage the U.S. because guns are our fentanyl. Guns are causing untold damage from Jamaica all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago. We need to engage with the U.S. on that. We need to engage with the U.S. on the issue of trade. We need to engage with the U.S. on the issue of tourism. So we need to develop a good relationship, a cordial relationship, a relationship that leads to mutual development. We recognize America's right to pursue the path, how they want to pursue their path. They must also recognize us. We are a small country, but we are a country of people with pride and dignity. So what's the way forward? I think we need, as a region, collectively, to come together. And I think if you go from Jamaica in the north to Trinidad in the south, that all of these countries, all of these islands agree on the issue of Cuba. Of course, there are some people in these countries, as you indicated, Trinidad, who may carry a different position, who may feel pressure by the United States. There may be some people who say, well, we need to do what the U.S. says. But once you start going down that path and you start to sacrifice your dignity and sovereignty, it is a road that will lead you over a precipice. So my view, we maintain our relationship with the U.S. We do all that we possibly can. Our foreign services, our foreign offices, our foreign ministers need to get together and come together and approach the United States openly, frankly, and say, listen, this is our national interest. We need the relationship with Cuba. Healthcare is the most critical issue confronting us, at least one of the most indicative of where we are. But look at the budget debate. That was the major issue. Cuba has helped us. If the U.S. is approaching us to help on healthcare, I have no difficulty, but they are approaching us for us to cut off. So my view is that we continue in a very cordial, very respectful way to engage with the United States. Remember, we are only engaging now. This is the U.S., the Trump administration with Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State, which is their foreign minister. In 5 or so years, we will end up or may end up in a different position. But as it stands at the moment, we shall engage with the U.S. State Department, indicate to them that we are all united on this issue, because once we start breaking away, and we need to engage on all of the issues, including Cuba, we can talk about it. But we do not compromise our national interests. And we talk about guns. We tell the United States, listen, you are shipping guns down. You're complaining about Mexico and Canada with fentanyl and drugs. Well, you are shipping guns. We don't manufacture guns. It's the biggest issue in the Caribbean, but we don't manufacture guns. It's coming from somewhere, and all the evidence is coming from the U.S. So they should put some border restrictions that allows these guns not to enter into our space or not to leave their space and enter into our space. So I say yes, we understand the U.S. has its own national interests. We respect the U.S. national interests. We respect their geopolitical interests. We disagree with it in the case of Cuba. As we've always said, we disagree with their geopolitical position on Cuba, but we have ours. And we as a people, regional Caribbean people, you remember back when it was relations were established with Cuba, it was Burnham and Eric Williams and Michael Manley. These guys stood tall. These leaders today should stand tall on this issue, because it's not just an issue of Cuba, it's an issue of our sovereignty and our right to pursue our own path to development.
And let us now segue into another issue that emerged as well last week, where the Associated Press and the New York Times, of course, these are very credible news organizations. Incidentally, Mr. Trump banned the Associated Press from the White House because they refused to go along with his renaming of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. So much for free speech, but that's another question. There is a list of countries that are on a proposal lists the following countries whose citizens could face restrictions from entering the U.S. And on that list include the following. Of course, there's a three-tiered list here. 1, red, all travel ban. So Afghanistan, Cuba, of course, is on that list. Iran, Libya, Venezuela, so on. So no one from those countries can travel to the US, even if they have a visa. Orange, there's an orange listing, and then there is a yellow listing, which gives these countries 60 days to address concerns. Of course, we don't know what those concerns are, but maybe we can predict. The countries are Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Lucia. 4 Caribbean countries are on that list. Now, I want to begin again with Mr. Humphrey here. Mr. Humphrey, do you think this has anything to do, and again, we're speculating here what it could be. All of the countries listed here, of course, Grenada is not on that list, but all of the countries listed here have citizenship by investment programs. Do you think that this is the U.S. sort of retaliating against the CBI program that these countries have in place?
Well, I don't know. It's difficult to follow the logics, if there's any, in the policies as formulated by the Donald Trump administration. The closest ally and neighbor, Canada, has difficulty in understanding it, much less us. Interestingly, I mean, if that is the consideration, a CBI program, but Trump has just announced a CBI program for the United States. He's called it the golden passport or the golden card system. And I think it costs, what, $5 million? Is it $5 million? $5 million. If you have $5 million, you could buy one of those. But isn't that the same thing that we are doing here in Grenada? So why is it good for the United States and is okay for them to do, but we who are less resourced, right, and who are subject to high taxes on whatever little we produce, why is it not good for us? In other words, you are asking me a question to get into the minds of an irrational group of people, and that's an impossibility to do, because it's not based on anything rational. It's based on a series of very archaic, in my view, that is, racist innovations that create these issues. So it's difficult to understand because St. Lucia has a CBI, Grenada has a CBI, but Grenada is not yet on the program, but St. Lucia is. I can't figure that one out, Dr. Bubb. Unfortunately, I can't help you. I can't help you there. All I could do is to expose the ridiculousness of the program. The announcement that they will seize the Panama Canal. The announcement that Iceland should become part of the United States and that Canada must be a 51st state. I mean, you know, is that the thinking and policy formulation of rational minds? So we are living in a very uncertain period of irrationality, and you don't know when you wake up in the morning what the next announcement is going to be. So it's difficult. I can't answer that question. What I do know is this: that in respect of the principal topic of the presence of Cuban medical, I call them internationalist workers, Grenada, as most countries in the Caribbean, the health system would, in short order, collapse. Right? We don't have specialist doctors, and where we have Grenadians who have been fortunate enough to receive university scholarships through the local medical school here, what you discover is that they all go to the United States. Few of them remain here. And this is why we have to rely on our Cuban brothers and sisters to provide us with the services that we need. So it's a difficult one. I think the Honorable Peter David has a good perspective on this, because one does not necessarily want to antagonize the United States. I mean, we shouldn't pick a quarrel with the United States. But what do you do if you're going down the street to buy an ice cream and a bully decides to snatch your money? What do you do?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, Mr. David, what do you do? The bully is trying to snatch your money
this
here.
is not an issue that cuts down on ideological lines. There are I think across the ideological spectrum, across the political spectrum, we all agree on this issue of look, for example, people from Grenada and the Caribbean travel to the US all the time seeking medical attention. Why? Because the medical system in our countries, despite all the assistance from Cuba, still have some deficiencies. The US is clamping down on immigration into the US. They're clamping down on Grenadians and other Caribbean people going to the hospitals. If you go to the hospitals and you try to get medical care now, it is more difficult than it was in the past. If you go and you get medical care, they require you to pay for it, else you cannot go back. So they're clamping down on our access to what limited access and sometimes illegal access we get to health in the US, and at the same time trying to block us getting the help from the countries that are willing to help us. That does not have an ideological color to it. What it has is a humanity color to it. And I think all Grenadians, all Caribbean people, despite their political or ideological orientation, believe that what the US is doing with respect to Cuban workers, with respect to immigration, with respect to immigrants and illegal immigration is wrong. So I think our politicians can rest assured that it will not cost them any political capital to stand up on this issue. In fact, I think if any politician in the region were to weaken and buckle under the pressure of the Trump administration on this issue, they are more likely to lose political capital. So I believe that our politicians across the spectrum, be it center, center left, center right, extreme left, they can all rest assured. I think a poll was done in Trinidad, maybe it's a small poll indicating that 100% of the people supported us on this Cuban issue. So I think what do? We confront the issue with hands closed, fists closed, and say, listen, this is not an issue. It may benefit you, Mr. Trump, in your elections, but you see in our elections in the Caribbean, that is not a winner for us. A winner will be having the guts to stand and say, listen, we may not share Cuba's ideological perspective. We may not like Cuba's political system, but we do appreciate Cuban help. And that for us is a red line that we do not cross. If you cross that line, you're going to suffer politically. That is my view. The way forward is for our politicians to get the guts to stand on it.
Ms. Charles, should politicians develop, as they say in Cuba in Spanish, los cojones in this moment? Because
I was looking for the word, Keller.
There you go, I found it. I've used my linguistic experience here with this. But Ms. Charles, again, we saw what Mr. Trump did with Zelensky. He brought him into the White House, and it was a dress down. Right? It was a public dress down in front of his vice president. Now, who is to say that Mr. Trump will not summon leaders of CARICOM into the White House and similarly engage in a public dress down that says it's either you send those Cuban doctors home or we impose the same sanctions, manner of sanctions that we have on Cuba on the rest of the Caribbean? What happens in that if that were to occur?
All I can say is that, as I said before, the matter is not as simplistic as the issue of a visa. But the issue of visas are important because a lot of Grenadians have the United States visas and they are happy with that visa. They can travel to see their relatives and so on. So I think that one of the things that we got to do is to have a national discussion on that issue. We need to have a national discussion in Grenada as to whither thou goest. From the first administration with Trump, he called leaders from the Caribbean. And I heard when they arrived in Mar-a-Lago, it was as if they were people looking for a job. They were placed in a little room, given scant courtesy, and nothing came out of that meeting. Then, as you just mentioned, the issue of Zelensky. It was the most public display of international disrespect that I have ever seen in my life. You talk about what happened in the Grenada Parliament. This was trillion times worse. I've never seen that. So as Brother Chester mentioned, Trump is irrational. We cannot predict what he would do. We could have gone to Obama, President Obama, maybe President Biden, and have a logical discussion. You cannot go to Trump and have a logical discussion. But as Brother Peter David said, let us try, and let us try as CARICOM. But let us assume that Trump treats us just as Zelensky, or he treats us with some respect, and he decides, I am going to go ahead with sanctions. Grenada is going to be on the list. Grenadians are going to lose their visas. What are the implications, the political implications in Grenada for something like that? As I've always said, as a region, we need to look at the worst case scenario. What can happen? And in Grenada, we have to look at it and look at it very fast. We don't have much time because Trump is putting out things every day, every week, every night. And his tweets are policies now. There were policies before, there are policies now. So I don't know if things are going to get better. In my view, things are going to get worse. So one of the things we got to do is to feed ourselves. We have to feed ourselves. We cannot rely on outside help anymore from the United States. We got to have new friends. We got to have new trading partners. We have to reach out to Grenadians at home and abroad, especially those at home. They must know what is going on. They should not listen to what I am saying here this morning or listen to what you are saying. They have to listen to the leaders, the government, and the government must listen to them, so that we can chart the way forward. My thing is that things are not going to get better. So whereas going to Trump is a very good idea, we want to foster good relationships with the US. We are not fighting with the US government. There's no need to fight with anybody. But we have to realize that we are just small fish in an ocean of sharks. And we have to find some way to escape or to hide and preserve ourselves. That is the reality of the whole thing. So I feel that we should look at the worst case scenario and put policies in place to deal with whatever happens. It is going to be a rough ride. We must let our citizens know that it can be a very rough ride and they have to be prepared.
And I can't put it any more frankly and succinctly. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very, very important conversation. Again, we will be having a follow-up because we do want to hear. So perhaps I will challenge you, Mr. David, Ms. Charles, if you wanted to add some. Before you do, Mr. David, I will challenge you. If you know of a Cuban medical professional in Grenada who wants to come on the Bubb Report without fear of speaking, please recommend them to the Bubb Report. We'd love to hear from them, but you wanted to make a point, sir.
Sure. I just want to make a point in closing, and I'm addressing yourself and your large diaspora listenership, that our political strength also exists in the United States. I mean, in all of the districts of the U.S., but in particular on the East Coast where you live. I think our communities must also make their views heard on this issue. They must write to their congressmen, write to their local officials. In other words, our Caribbean people in the diaspora must recognize their political strength. I mean, many communities have done it, and I know we are doing it more these days because there are many more Caribbean officials in government now. But they must use their strength on this issue. Tell their local borough president and the mayors and the congressmen and congresswomen that this is an issue that they must advocate for the Caribbean on. The people who we elect in Brooklyn, in Washington, in New Jersey, wherever, these people must recognize must recognize that our interest is not just to vote for them in the diaspora, but our diaspora community in Grenada, in St. Vincent, in Dominica, and these people are well served by our Cuban medical practitioners. So, Kellan, people like yourself, and you doing it by having shows like these, must ensure that the people they elect advocate for their families in the Caribbean. I just wanted to make that point to speak to your large audience that you have out there.
Yes, and of course, in closing, Mr. David, I noted with interest that you were minted as the unofficial leader of the opposition for remaining in Parliament last week.
Only for 1 hour, man. I mean, I'm thankful for the position.
Again, I'm saying that in jest.
I noticed you had a lovely discussion with Senator Humphrey and Senator, what's her name?
Tessa Sincere, yes.
Tessa Sincere before.
Yes.
And very, very thought-provoking and very informative discussion that you had. And I want to congratulate you again on always having them kinds of programs.
Yeah, yes, Mr. David. Yes, Mr. David. And of course, we will be watching the space in respect of this movement building, this tour that you're going on. When is the next meeting? Are you going to be having a meeting again?
You will be the first to know, Kellan. I will come on and announce it on your show.
Mr. Humphrey, over to you, sir, for some closing comments. Mr. Humphrey, as I get to you for closing comments, sir, on more local politics, are you still a card-carrying member of the New National Party, sir?
Yes, I am a card-carrying member. I have not relinquished my membership.
Okay.
And usually in these things, I pay up ahead of time, but I have not been active in the party. The last time I attended an executive meeting was in November of 2022. And that is by choice. All right. I just didn't think from my own analytical thinking, which has always guided me fairly accurately, that we would have arrived at a certain point and got there. And so I am what would be called a kind of member in absentia. I've not been to any of the executive meetings. And I'm not a current member of the executive. I am just a regular card-bearing member. But I'm giving thought as to where my destiny will ultimately lead. But at the moment that you ask this question,
yes,
I on the virtue of the rules of the party, I'm a paid-up member.
Okay, and you're thinking about what your future would look like in the party. I would hope that you would make that announcement on the Bubb Report, sir, when that time comes.
Well, if there's an announcement to be made, whoever presents the first opportunity, I will take it.
All right.
But because of the special relationship I have with this program, and I think it's a very in-depth program, and I think you put a lot of effort and thing into it.
Yes, sir.
I may extend that privilege of you being the first to know.
All right. Well, I look
that's
forward
where things are at the moment.
Okay, sir.
I hope I don't wake up tomorrow morning and receive a letter of expulsion. You know, these things have a way of happening.
Well, there is a new leader now, so who knows? Maybe her approach might be different. Who knows? We don't know. Ms. Charles, Ms. Charles, same question to you. Are you still a card-carrying member of the NNP? Any thoughts? You know, your party now has a new female political leader. I'm sure you have some comments on that, Ms. Charles.
I don't have much comments on that at all. I'm a card-bearing member, but I don't even think about it. As Chester said, one has to weigh one's political options and look at where one can place oneself to best serve our country, not whether it's in a party or not.
Okay.
And I'm weighing my options.
Okay, well, Ms. Charles, over to you for some closing comments on this question of the Cuban medical mission and the overall geopolitics of this period with the United States.
Well, we are caught up as usual. As I said in the beginning, it's just collateral damage. We are in the crossfire as small islands. That's what we are. But however small we are, we have our dignity, we have our sovereignty. And I would agree with MP David that we have to ensure that we call on our Grenadian diaspora and all other Caribbean people and like-minded people, whether in the Caribbean or not, so that they can lobby the politicians, the senators and representatives. I am not sure that would work because Trump seems to be a very erratic person and you don't know what he's going to do from one day to the next. My thing is hope for the best and prepare for the worst. That is what we have to do as a nation. In CARICOM, we have to work with CARICOM and we also have to work internally.
Yeah. Mr. Humphrey, over to you, sir, for some closing comments. Do you associate yourself with the sentiments of Ms. Charles here in respect of the fallout from all of this, the consequences for the region from all of what might be coming down the pipe from Washington?
But I also want to use the opportunity really to thank the Cuban workers for their dedication, for their humanism, all right, and for the contributions they have made, not just to Grenada, but to humanity. I think there's a term called the better angels. Cubans are the better angels, right? And they practice their medical skills all over the world. Yeah, and I really want to, from the bottom of my heart, and I feel very emotional about this, are people who have given so much to the world, right? And the sacrifices that the Cuban people have made, that we need to stand by them. You know, these are valiant people. These are people who give even when they don't have. You know, even when they don't have. They comes, they live amongst us just ordinarily, just like us. You know what I mean? They love for music, they love for dance, they love for, I mean, having a good time. They are human beings, you know. And I want to, my closing remarks would be in the face of all of this, to extend a Grenadian thank you from the bottom of the hearts of the hundreds of thousands of Grenadians, right, who would be deeply appreciative of what Cuba has given and continues to give. Enormous sacrifices under very difficult and challenging times for themselves. And that's how I would like to close.
Mr. Humphrey, thank you for that. And Mr. David, over to you, sir, for some closing comments. Just unmute the mic, sir.
Yeah, I want to endorse what Chester just said in relation to the Cuban medical practitioners, but not only to thank them for what they've done, the medical workers, but to thank Cuba in general for the international airport and all the other areas of cooperation. In fact, my biggest regret is that we are not able to do more. And that is why we must continue to advocate for the removal of the blockade. Imagine if there was no blockade on Cuba, if Cuba was allowed to develop free of this what I call a criminal blockade, what kind of cooperation we would have had. So I think we cannot give them material assistance because we ourselves are strapped, but we certainly can continue to advocate. We certainly can continue to do what is possible. Gratitude for that, but not only to show our gratitude, but to show our own humanity that we have, and I know we have, that has been extended to us, a humanity that has been extended to us by the Cubans. So I want to say, join chest in that, but also to say that we as a people, not only in Grenada, must resist the attempts. And I believe we will succeed in resisting the attempts, because I think the administration will push as far as it can to get as much as it can. They've done it in other instances, push, and then when the resistance steps up, they back off. I don't think it's a losing battle. I think we can win that battle to maintain our sovereignty, integrity, and to maintain the relationship that we have with the people and government of Cuba. So my parting words is simply that let's just keep up the pressure to get Cuba a better place in our world, and to thank them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Mr. David, Ms. Charles, Chester Humphrey, to all of you, thank you so much for appearing on the Bubb Report this week. And I know that this is also the week of the celebration of March 13th. So long live to all of you on that parting note. Folks, this has been yet another edition of the Bubb Report. Again, I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellan Bubb. And I just want to reiterate, folks, that we really try our best here on this program to bring balance and to ensure that we ventilate all sides of an issue. We did invite Dr. Khan for this segment, but our assurance is that we will be getting the other side of this story because we do want to hear from Cuban medical professionals. We want to hear from those who are also opposed to the Cuban medical mission program, as articulated at the start of this segment. That is our commitment here. Again, the Bubb Report, is something that I do on the weekends, but it does take a lot of work to prepare for this program, to get guests booked. It is not that there's a lot of background work that happens. There's a lot of research that we do as well to ensure that the information we are presenting to you is of a particular quality and standard, so that at the end of the program, you can go away more educated and more empowered with the knowledge of the issues that are animating life in our communities. So this is what we're all about. And again, all of this is done with the help of one competent producer that I have, and also against the backdrop of the fact that I also have a full-time job. So it does take a lot of work, but it's something that I believe I will continue to give a commitment to. And on that note, I just want to say that on the 15th of May, the Bubb Report will be having a special celebration of its 5th anniversary at the Grenada Trade Center in a commemorative lecture. It will be the first lecture in honor of Lou Smith, the late Lou Smith, Leslie Pear, and George Grant. It will be a memorial lecture. So stay tuned for more information on what that event would entail. And we will be having a Caribbean VIP who will be the inaugural speaker at that inaugural memorial lecture that the Bubb Report will be having in May, on the 15th of May this year. So it will be at the Grenada Trade Center. We will be providing more information as the date comes closer. So on behalf of the producer of the Bubb Report, I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellan Bubb, thanking you for watching. Please do us a favor by liking and sharing this program. And we will see you next week for another installment of the Bubb Report. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Tell as a commissioner of police, tell the politician, back off. You have no knowledge of the law. You have no knowledge of law enforcement. You cannot force my officers to do the wrong thing.
But that is somebody's son. That is somebody's child. That is part of a family. And I think that is the part that they are missing out.
Because E and F are apt to be used oppressively.
It's like because we don't see disabled people as sexual beings, which is ridiculous.
You mean they don't want to listen to your version of science? They have their own science. You have your science.
What we need to do is teach people to think and not what to think.
Today, it's too bad that everybody do what they want.
If I could forgive Bernard Ford, then I could forgive Morris too. And today, on this day, I no more have anything in my heart for what he did.
The education system has to be very fluid and dynamic because we're living in very different and changing times.
Treating all your citizens equally, all your citizens fairly, recognizing each group, not discriminating against one or the other.